All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am here with Alex Millar, a Bitcoin maximalist. Alex, welcome this morning.
Thanks for having me, Jarrett. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. So, Alex, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, more in a general sense, and how you got interested and into Bitcoin.
I guess it started in university. I was actually majoring in engineering, but I took an economics course as an elective, and I really enjoyed it. And I actually started reading more about it just for fun, and became really sort of enamored with capitalism and the benefits of free markets versus government interventions. And I enjoy debating my roommates about the benefits of capitalism and socialism.
What years is this?
This is 1998.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a long time ago.
Long time ago. Yeah. And then life went on. I became a high school teacher. I sort of put those ideas under the rug because I don't know. I sort of became disillusioned that they would ever be enacted. I saw, government getting bigger and bigger, and I didn't really see much enthusiasm among my friends and family, or the general public for free market.
Yeah.
So I just sort of gave up on them and moved on with life and became a teacher. Taught for 4 years. I read a good book called, I was never really a good teacher. I was a good soccer coach. But I read a book called What Technology Wants by Kevin Kelly. And that got me really excited about software. And I quit teaching after 4 years, became a software support guy. Worked with databases on an old software, but it sort of opened my eyes to software. And right around that time, I heard about Bitcoin for the first time. It was actually on a CBC, ironically enough, radio show.
So what year do you think that was?
I've probably heard about it 2011.
Okay.
Yeah. So a couple of years into Bitcoin, I think it was like 10 cents or something at that time.
Yeah.
And it was a cool episode called Spark with Nora Young. I think it was an hour-long episode all about the history of money. And I never really thought that much about money before. It was just something that, was a store of value, enabled a medium of exchange. But I didn't really realize until then how much governments benefited from fiat currency. And how dollars, our current dollars, are backed by nothing. They're just tokens that are printed ad infinitum. And then there was a little segment at the end of that show about Bitcoin. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And so I just sort of kept on reading about it when I heard about it, when it came in the news. And then 2013, I was getting kind of, Vancouver, I was fortunate because I lived in Vancouver, and Vancouver became the site of the world's first Bitcoin ATM. So I went down there and bought a couple $100 worth. I think the price is around $300. And in that, once I had some Bitcoin, I really started studying it in depth. And actually creating YouTube videos, sort of sharing my learning and my understanding with the anyone who watched YouTube, everyone. So that was really, really fun. And I kept on buying more and more through 2015 when I sort of had the conviction that it was really a big deal, and I sort of almost went all in.
So when we think about Bitcoin, I guess my first question related to Bitcoin specifically is, can you tell us a little bit about Satoshi Nakamoto and what is his or her or their relationship to Bitcoin?
So Satoshi wrote the code for the first version of Bitcoin. He published a white paper which described the code a few months before he released the code. He released the code in January of 2009, I believe. And at that point in time, anybody could download the code. It was open source. And anyone could put a machine to work to attempt to mine Bitcoin. That was a very honest launch. Unlike a lot of the cryptocurrency or crypto projects launched today, which often do pre-mines. But we don't know a lot about Satoshi. He or she or they continue to work on the project for I'm not sure about the date. Don't quote me, but 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
At which point they sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
And left the project in the broader programming or Bitcoin community.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so Satoshi is totally anonymous. Nobody knows who this person is or group of people.
As far as I know, yeah.
Why is that important to Bitcoin? Why does that matter?
Well, I mean, I think it matters because, take Ethereum, for example. Vitalik has, an appearance and pimples, and and people can attack him,
right?
And he does control the Ethereum project,
yeah,
to a large extent. So it's good for Bitcoin in that it can't be attacked through ad hominem attacks,
right?
Which can be damaging to a project,
right?
It's also good for Satoshi himself because his invention threatens those in power. So by remaining anonymous or pseudonymous, he can't be harmed.
Right. And so when we talk about, the attacks on maybe Vitalik, who founded Ethereum, versus Satoshi, who nobody knows, how is the connection of kind of like a human being relating to a crypto project? Why does that add to the level, or how does that, or does it add to the level of security around Bitcoin?
Yeah, I guess I should say more about your previous question. So another benefit of him disappearing, not just remaining anonymous, but disappearing, is that he doesn't hold sway anymore.
Right.
Now, everybody who, there is a rough hierarchy of Bitcoin contributors, Bitcoin Core contributors, who have established through work reputation for doing good coding.
Right.
And I'm not a Bitcoin Core contributor. I don't. This is sort of hearsay for me. I don't really know what's going on in that world.
Yes.
But I mean, just for thinking about it logically, if Vitalik, for example, in the Bitcoin fork war a few years back, some Bitcoiners wanted to make the Bitcoin blocks larger. Some wanted to keep them the same. Some wanted to keep them smaller.
Okay.
And it was a real marketplace of ideas, because there was just all these different Bitcoiners,
right,
promoting what they thought was the best for Bitcoin.
Right.
If Satoshi had been involved in that discussion, people wouldn't have necessarily listened to the ideas. They would have said, "Well, Satoshi thinks this,
right?
So that's what we should do." That, yeah.
Okay, so when we think about Satoshi himself, you had said he disappeared, or he's not around anymore. So nobody knows. So he hasn't contributed to the Bitcoin community at all for a whole number of years, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you mentioned blocks. So maybe can you explain a little bit about, for a person who has never really understood what blockchain is, can you explain a little bit of what blockchain is, and also answer the question, did Satoshi invent blockchain? Is that the first time blockchain existed, or is this some technology that's been around for a long time?
Sure. So I think a lot of people are familiar with Excel databases.
Yeah.
And you can imagine someone creating money using an Excel database. And you would just have columns or rows with individuals' names on it, and columns or rows with their balance on it, or transactions.
Yeah.
And every time Alice wanted to send money to Bob, Alice's balance would go down and Bob's balance would go up, and a new transaction would be added.
Yeah.
Satoshi decided to group transactions together in blocks.
Okay.
And this was done because he decided to use proof of work to decide on transaction ordering.
Yeah.
So if Alice had 2 Bitcoin, and she sent 2 Bitcoin to Bob, and she sent 2 Bitcoin to Charlie,
yeah,
and broadcast those transactions, both of them are valid transactions, because she has 2, but only one can be processed.
Right.
So we have to decide which one came first.
Yeah.
And Satoshi, Bitcoin uses proof of work. So what that means is that miners are out there doing arbitrary computations, and based on who does the most work, that person, and sort of a lottery or a probabilistic lottery, once every, on average, 10 minutes, one miner will obtain the privilege of time-stamping a block of transactions.
So a block is fundamentally a group of transactions.
Yes.
So is there a certain number of transactions that can fit in a block?
Yeah. So originally in version 1 of Bitcoin, there was no limit on block size. And then after a few years, I don't know the exact timeline, but Satoshi realized that if Bitcoin was going to scale, it needed to have a limit. On blocks, on block size.
Because there was no reason to make new blocks if it was an unlimited size, right? Or was it just by time, number of minutes that a new block would be made?
So yeah, it's based on time, roughly every 10 minutes on average.
Yeah.
But and you could if you think of, like, if you ask a child, let's make it bigger. That's the easiest way to scale it is to make blocks bigger. Why limit it?
Right.
But the reason you want to limit it is because every 10, if you're creating a new block every 10 minutes, and that block has size, and you want individuals, so you want individuals to be able to have the entire history of Bitcoin on their home computer. If that history gets too big, like say it gets up to a terabyte, well, very few people today have a terabyte hard drive at home.
Right.
So that would mean that Bitcoin would be less centralized. It would be more centralized.
So can you explain, and I guess the size of a terabyte, obviously in 2009 or whenever this started, it was a huge amount of information. So what is the relationship with me holding the ledger or being able to have the full blockchain ledger on my own home computer, and why does that matter?
Okay, so sure. So some precursors to Bitcoin, I'm blanking on Liberty coin, or there was a bunch of precursors to Bitcoin. One of them was just like basically an Excel spreadsheet in Costa Rica or Panama.
Yeah.
And it got shut down because it was only on one computer in Panama.
Right.
So the CIA or FBI went in there and said, hey, you can't make your own money.
Yeah.
We control the money.
Right.
And so those guys got put in jail, and that was the end of that money.
Yeah.
So in order to avoid that fate, you need to have the Bitcoin ledger, or the entire blockchain, on many computers around the world, decentralized.
Okay.
This is the way to make it anti-fragile, to make it robust against state attacks.
Okay.
Because Bitcoin is a fundamental attack on the state. Right. The state relies, so much of the power of state comes from its ability to print dollars and euros and yen. Yeah. And if Bitcoin succeeds, that states will lose that power. They'll be, a fraction of what they were before. So the state doesn't want it to exist. Right. So that's why it needs to be decentralized. Yes. And that's why it needs to have small blocks, because if you have big blocks, then the size of the ledger is going to grow really fast, and very few people are going to be able to store it.
Okay. So can I go and hack into a transaction that happened last week and change it so that maybe I manipulate the block to say that I actually have more Bitcoin than I actually do?
So you can do that on your node, but there's tens of thousands of other nodes around the world. Okay. And you can't hack into all of them. Okay. And they all agree. There's this consensus. They call it the Nakamoto consensus. Yeah. And every 10 minutes, everyone agrees. Someone says, hey, I found the magic number. Here's my new block of transactions. Yeah. And everybody else's node looks and says, yep, all those transactions are valid. Yep, they did the work. Okay, yep, that's the tail of the blockchain. Let's start working on that to find the next block that goes on top of that.
Yeah.
Occasionally there's disagreement. Somebody in Moscow and somebody in Vancouver will find a block at near the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's up to the next people. Both of those are valid if they did the same amount of work. And it's up to the next person. Maybe it's in, I don't know, Chicago.
Yeah.
And they saw the block come from Vancouver before Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
So they go on and work on the one from Vancouver. And the miner who mined the block in Moscow is shit out of luck.
Yeah. Okay.
They don't get the 6.25 Bitcoin reward plus all the fees for the transactions in the block that they mined.
Okay. So maybe that's a good segue. So what incentivizes me to start mining Bitcoin or to validate all of these blocks? Because obviously with the proof of work concept, there is going to be a cost to me to do this. So what's the incentive?
So it's very analogous to mining gold. People mine gold for tens, thousands of years at least. They dug into the earth, they did real work, and sometimes they found gold. Yeah. And that gold had a market value, and they decided that work was worth it, or they didn't, and they quit. Yeah. Bitcoin mining is really analogous to that, except on top of the fresh, quote unquote, fresh Bitcoin that is found or not found, miners are also rewarded with all of the fees all of the fees attached to all of the transactions in any blocks that they mine.
So if they mine a block, they get, what did you say, 6.25 Bitcoin?
Currently, I believe it's 6.25.
So they get 6.25 Bitcoin plus all of the transaction fees that the person who initiated the transaction pays.
Yeah. So if they, I'm not up to date on the numbers, but say there's 1,000 transactions in a block. Yeah. Each probably more than that, probably 10,000. Each transaction has on average a 10-cent transaction fee. Yeah. Denominated in Bitcoin, of course. Yeah. That person will get $1,000. I think it's more than that these days on average, but
okay. And so we often hear people talk about Satoshis, so first of all, what is a Satoshi and how many of them are there in a Bitcoin?
So like there's 100 cents in a dollar. Yeah. There's 100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin. It's the lowest fraction of a Bitcoin that's recorded. Although, yeah.
Did he create the term Satoshi?
No.
That was added later, or is that actually a technical term?
I mean, it's a
common term.
It's a common term.
Yeah, people have, I guess.
It seems like every couple of years there's a debate about what they should call it.
Oh, really?
Some people think it should be bits.
Right.
Some people think it should be Satoshis. Some people think we should speak about millibits. Some people think we should rename Satoshis to Bitcoins. Yeah, it's all sorts of.
Well, I guess when there's 100 million of them, it gets very confusing when you're transacting a few dollars denominated in Bitcoin.
Right.
Because you're like, is that 7,000 Satoshis or 70,000? It's hard. It's hard to kind of, for our minds, I guess, from a utility perspective to think about that type of stuff.
It's different because all the fiat currencies, like there's roughly 100 yen in a dollar, right?
Right.
And roughly, I don't know, $1.50 in a British pound. They're all sort of this around the same decimal. The decimals are within 2 or 3 places. Yeah. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's either one Bitcoin's $40,000 or one Satoshi's thousandths of a dollar.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit off.
Yeah. Okay. So can I today go and buy stuff with Bitcoin? And if I can, how does that happen?
There's lots of there not many brick and mortar places except Bitcoin. Especially in Vancouver. I think in El Salvador, a lot more brick and mortar places accept Bitcoin because it's legal tender there. Yeah. Online, I think there's many businesses that will accept Bitcoin. Yeah. And in daily life, like just last week, I had a couple contractors do some work for me in my yard. Yeah. And I asked them, hey, do you want dollars or are you interested in taking Bitcoin? And they said, yeah, I'll take Bitcoin. So you can do that. And then there's also businesses like coin cards that will sell you like Home Depot cards for Bitcoin.
Like Home Depot gift cards.
Or Amazon gift cards. Yeah. Or Apple gift cards for Bitcoin.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk about the Lightning Network and what that means to Bitcoin?
Sure. So the Lightning Network is a layer two, solution to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So it's kind of analogous to Visa or MasterCard.
Right.
Visa or MasterCard's like a layer on top of dollars.
Yeah.
That allows us to make payments more easily.
Yeah.
And Lightning Network was important to the block size debate, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So people said, well, back in the block size debate, they said, well, if you limit the block size to 1 megabyte per block,
Yeah.
that's going to limit the number of Bitcoin transactions to eight a second.
Yeah.
And that's not enough for Bitcoin to be used by the whole world.
Right.
That will prevent Bitcoin from becoming the world's money.
Yes. Because Visa is transacting something like 50,000 a second or something like that.
Yeah.
To put that into context.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Lightning Network kind of has worked to solve that problem.
Yes. So Lightning Network, you can think of it as a system of tabs. Like back in the old days, your local restaurant had a tab for you, and you would go there and eat, and they would say, okay, now your tab is no longer $100, now it's $120.
Right.
Hey, when are you going to pay up your tab, Jarrett?
Yeah.
And you would periodically you pay it up.
Yeah.
So you do, instead of paying every week for a meal, you'd pay every month or pay every year.
Yeah.
So with Lightning, it allows you and I, for example, to open a channel with one Bitcoin transaction, and then you and I can privately update that channel. Acts like a tab,
right?
So if I sell you an item or do work for you, we can adjust that tab accordingly, and the tab can be unilaterally closed,
right,
by either of us at any time.
Yeah.
Or it can be kept open.
Right.
So it greatly expands the scale of Bitcoin.
So an interesting side note or story. So you and I are neighbors, and last summer or the summer before, I can't quite remember, my kids sell lemonade in their lemonade stand, and you had said, hey, you guys should accept Bitcoin. And you gave my son a storybook about kids who used a lemonade stand to earn Bitcoin. And they then started selling lemonade. In addition to accepting Canadian dollars, they started to accept Bitcoin. And you are their number one Bitcoin paying customer. But others have paid with Bitcoin. I think more as a novelty because they think it's kind of cool and they're riding their bike past or whatever. But when it happens like that. The transaction is very quick.
When they pay with Lightning, that's another added bonus of Lightning. It's instant. You don't have to, even though, with a regular Bitcoin transaction, you'll get an instant notification that a transaction has been broadcast.
Right.
It's often not confirmed for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So whereas with Lightning, it's instant.
Yeah. Which is pretty amazing because they can with a phone, with two phones, transfer Bitcoin on Lightning Network, and now my son has a little bit of Bitcoin in his wallet, which is really exciting for him because when he gets thousands of Satoshis for a cup of lemonade, that's really motivating to him. He doesn't quite understand the context of how much that's worth, but it's pretty cool for them. And so the Lightning Network has enabled even kids to accept Bitcoin in the simplest of all businesses, which is, I guess, we all started with a lemonade stand, and that's been pretty cool. Okay, one thing that I wanted to maybe go back to. So, did Satoshi invent the blockchain, or was this a technology that has been around before?
Well, as far as I know, he did. I might be incorrect. He definitely invented, as far as I know, a ledger that was updated through proof of work.
Yes.
So, and that required a blockchain. There might have been other databases that were updated block at a time before, and maybe they were called blockchains, but they were definitely rewritable by some person in control of it.
Right. So
I would say that his invention is new.
Yeah.
It might come down to semantics. So someone had it before, but I mean, no, Satoshi's invention is new, and world changing.
Okay. And what is a Bitcoin maximalist? This is a term that sometimes you hear in the news. What does that actually mean?
Yeah. So a Bitcoin maximalist, I think in general terms, is someone who believes that Bitcoin will become the future money of the world.
Okay.
And there's many reasons why I believe that, and why I sort of argue about that a lot. I think the greatest one is the history of money. So there was a lot of things that acted as money in the past: seashells, furs, corals, copper, silver, gold. And over like the last 5,000 years, for a variety of reasons related to those things' properties, gold became more and more valuable.
Yeah.
Over the long term, it grew in value. An ounce of gold grew in value versus a seashell, and versus an ounce of silver.
Yeah.
Because of its properties, and then also because of network effects.
Okay. What is a network effect?
Network effects are like the classic example is a telephone. If you are the only person in the world with a telephone, it's useless. If 2 people have it, okay, it's a bit more useful.
Right.
If 1 million people have it, it's really useful.
Excellent. Yeah.
So same thing with Bitcoin. One of the challenges it's fighting is network effects.
Yeah.
Your sons are accepting it for their lemonade stand. That's great. Sons and daughters, sorry. But so few people have Bitcoin that is not that useful, because so it's lacking in network effects.
Yeah.
It's fighting against network effects.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why the US dollar is so powerful. It has great network effects now. Everybody recognizes it.
Yeah.
What distinguishes a US dollar from a Canadian dollar? Nothing, except for network effects.
Yeah. Okay. So a maximalist believes, and you proclaim to be a maximalist, believes that Bitcoin is going to at some point replace fiat currencies in general. And so what if that happens, what does that mean for governments? What do you think would happen for the American or the Canadian government, or whichever federal governments we're referring to?
Before I answer that, I want to go into sort of the present and future of why I'm a Bitcoin max, and why that term emerged, because it was actually coined by the creator of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin.
Okay.
And he used it like, you guys are a bunch of Bitcoin maximalists, like derogatory.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
And then we sort of, we are.
Yeah.
And the reason we are, because a lot of people come in and they're like, I feel like I missed the boat on Bitcoin. What's the next new thing? Is it Litecoin?
Right.
Is it Purecoin? Is it Ethereum? Is it Luna? Is it NFTs?
Yeah.
Or is it an ICO? And since Bitcoin has been invented, it's been this amazing thing, right? It's like so amazing. And all these, some of them are legit programs, projects, but a lot of scams have rode the wake of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then a lot of just bad ideas too. Like Litecoin is just a bad idea. Okay, let's make it Bitcoin but faster.
Yeah.
And people said, it's going to be the silver to Bitcoin's Lightning. And I mean, it kind of made sense. But now that you see that we have Lightning, we don't need a silver.
We don't need Lightning.
Everything is going to be gold.
Right.
And then Ethereum, it's more like a company,
right? More
like a software startup, than it is like a new kind of money,
right?
Because they have this equity. They created shares for themselves,
right,
essentially, and then sold them in a virtual IPO,
right?
So it's very centralized in terms of wealth. It's very centralized in terms of management and direction of the project.
Yeah.
And then it's also less scalable.
Yeah.
It's more hackable. It's more complex. Like Bitcoin, Satoshi purposely restricted the scale. He purposely restricted the blocks. He purposely restricted the expressiveness of the coding language.
Yeah.
To make it simple and bug free.
Yeah.
And Ethereum went, it's a project. It's more like the Canadian dollar than it is about Bitcoin.
Okay.
And so Bitcoiners were fighting against that. Like, stop comparing us with Ethereum.
Right.
Stop buying Ethereum. I mean, stop valuing it so highly based on Bitcoin. It's not an amazing invention.
Right. Okay.
It's not decentralized.
Right.
Okay.
So
you're sorry. And
so the next question is, so if Bitcoin does become the currency of the masses, what does that do to federal governments?
So I think it's a great question. And I don't think anyone really knows, but we can look in the past to when gold was the money.
Yeah.
To get a clue, and when gold was money, countries were far smaller. Leaders of countries had far less power. Christianity, Islam, many of the major religions of the world said lending lending gold at interest is not ethical. And I think that's important to touch on, because right now we have the opposite. We had the opposite ethic. Everybody is encouraged to go into debt, to borrow money.
Yeah.
And the government is the lender to a great point. The central bank or the commercial banks, they're lenders.
Right.
Everybody's a debt slave. There's a lot of drug addiction. There's a lot of hopelessness.
Right.
Because everybody is in debt.
Yeah.
So I dream that when Bitcoin is money again, fewer people will live in debt.
Yeah.
More people will live with savings.
Right.
Because savings is hope. Savings provides hope for the future.
Yeah.
Savings provides your ability to, okay, what am I going to do with my money? How do I want to change the world?
Yeah.
It's not just like, how am I going to pay the next month's bill?
Right.
This sucks,
So if we look at Bitcoin over, certain time periods, sometimes you hear like, if you buy Bitcoin, it never over a 4-year period has gone down in value. Or if you compare all of these other projects out there, these crypto projects, Bitcoin always wins over whatever time period. So as a maximalist, you obviously have some strong thoughts on this. So can you maybe briefly, and this is kind of how we'll wrap things up, put some of these types of ideas into context for us as far as your understanding of the value of Bitcoin over the time period that it's existed?
Yeah. So, sure. Yeah, I think that's true that it's never gone down in value over a 4-year period. I think it's true that it's worth more than $500 billion US now, all the Bitcoin, like the market cap, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the fastest growing assets of all time.
Right.
I've mentioned it before, there's a lot of other projects out there. Some of them like to take advantage of the kind of misunderstanding that your son has.
Right.
And they price their token, they create a quadrillion, a gazillion tokens.
Yeah.
And each of them is only worth a tenth of a penny.
Yeah.
And so people are like, oh, it's only worth a tenth of a penny. Bitcoin is worth $40,000.
Yeah.
How this one's more likely to double.
Right.
And that's it's a mathematical fallacy.
Right. I remember you had tweeted maybe a few months ago, you compared the top 10 projects from a few years ago compared to Bitcoin today, and who would have the greatest value if you had invested at that point. What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think I did I was going to do top 10, but I was lazy. So I think I did top 7 from 4 or 5 years ago and looked at them today, compared them, their price, how they've grown with respect to Bitcoin over the past 4 years.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are like, I missed Bitcoin. I'm going to try to get the next one. So I'll just buy number 2 through 10.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had gone down by 80% compared to Bitcoin. I think only 1 or 2 had gone up.
Yeah.
And I know that in the past little bit, we've seen the top 4 project go from, number 4 to nothing.
To 0. Yeah.
Terra Luna.
Which is painful for people who had, for example, got a Terra Luna tattoo on their arm.
Yeah. Well,
and
a lot of people committed suicide.
Committed their life. Yeah, exactly. So
it was a big it was a big thing.
This is such a positive note to end on. Okay, this has been fascinating conversation. I think we've learned a lot about understanding, what is blockchain, who is Satoshi, the value of Bitcoin, kind of how currencies kind of came into existence, and it gives us a clear picture of kind of the foundations of crypto. it's great to sit in the room and talk to a maximalist who's been in the community. I guess you're an OG to Bitcoin, and that's not something a lot of people can say. What's your Twitter handle?
It's the Alex Galaxy.
The Alex Galaxy. You tweet some interesting things about freedom, about free markets, about libertarian economics, and obviously about Bitcoin as well. So you're a great guy to follow, and I always appreciate when you send me mean and demeaning messages about the altcoins that I invest in. All right. Thanks so much for being with me here today,
Thanks,
Alex.
Jared. That was fun.
Thank you.